Hey, and welcome back. I have been meaning to do more videos. I keep saying that. I should probably stop saying that. The one big thing that's going to be glaring at this point is that I didn't really do anything for Canada Reads, which I really thought I was going to get around to. In the end, I think I kind of had too much going on with work, and also there was a lot of stuff that I really wanted to read instead. And a lot of what made the shortlist actually was less interesting to me than I thought it was going to be. So I do still have a buddy read that I did for Birdie, which I should be putting up the results of that pretty soon. And hopefully I'll be able to do kind of a crossover video with the other person that I've done it with. So stay tuned for that, and that's one thing I'll at least have been able to do for Canada Reads. But until then, that's sort of the extent of your Canlit coverage from me. Sorry about that. I am going to be doing a little bit more with Canlit in the near future, but this time around, I think it just didn't work out. So either way, hopefully you are going to be interested in what I did read so far this month. So this is the part one of my March wrap up. The way that I'm doing it so that I can avoid super long videos again is I'm going to do them probably about 4 to 5 books at a time. So I'm going to talk about the first 4 books that I read in March, and then I'll do another video and possibly even a part three, depending on how many I get done this month. So of the first 4 that I read this month, the first was The Rosey Effect, which I did actually read the sequel to The Rosie Project, which I think was a little bit of a surprise. I wound up seeing it at the library and I kind of figured I'd give it a shot. So the interesting thing about it is I did genuinely like it better than the Rosie Project. I think the thing that majorly helped was that these characters were already established, and I felt like a lot of what the Rosie Project did was it obsessed about setting up these characters, introducing you to their quirks, rather than actually letting them do anything with that. So I had a couple of issues with it. So the lead character ostensibly has Asperger's or some form of autism. I only say ostensibly because even the book seems to make a little bit of fun about the fact that people keep guessing that, but he's never actually been properly diagnosed with it. Although he's made so robotic to the point where he's almost cartoonish in his reasoning or in the way that he interacts. And so you kind of think, it would be strange if he is at this level of his career in the sciences and hasn't been tested for it, since so many people have guessed that he has it. But I don't know the finer details when it comes to autism, and I don't know if that's an offensive take on it. Regardless, it does seem like this weird continuing thing that the book series is doing, where it's made cute, but they're never really resolving it one way or the other. So there is this ongoing joke that he has autism. The central plot revolves around the fact that he has now moved in with Rosie, who he was trying to date the first time around, but didn't realize that she was perfect for him, et cetera, et cetera. They've moved to New York together, and now they are expecting a baby. But because of his difficulties interacting with people, he's very worried he's not going to be the ideal father. And in the same way that the original book has him kind of quantifying love or quantifying women, etc., he is quantifying fatherhood or parenthood. And that, for obvious reasons, starts to create rifts in his relationship. It was better, like I said. I still didn't love it, but I definitely felt like because the author Graeme Simison had gotten a lot of the character work out of the way, now he was freer to actually focus on a plot. Whereas it felt like the Rosie Project not only didn't have a plot, but the plot twists and turns were so obvious as to be uninteresting. So that was the first one. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. What I would say is that if you enjoyed the Rosie Project, my guess is you'll probably enjoy this much more. If you didn't enjoy the Rosie Project, you might be pleasantly surprised by this one, but it's not something I would go out of my way to read. So the second requires a little bit more explanation, and it is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, but it's also the first time I've done a reading, quote unquote, as an audiobook. So I did it a little bit as a companion, which meant that I would read up to a certain point in the book. Let's say I was on, like, at home and I was reading it, but then I'd get on the train to work and I'd catch up with the audiobook. The audiobook, incidentally, was read by Juliet Stevenson, who I don't know if you've seen her in anything else, but the most prominent role from the IMDb, as far as I could tell, was she played Keira Knightley's mother in Bend It Like Beckham. But she is really, really fantastic in this audiobook role. And brought the book to life in some really interesting ways. I've always had a hard time getting through Jane Austen's work that isn't Pride and Prejudice, because that always seems like her strongest and at the same time her lightest work. Like, it's so dialogue heavy and it's so based on, and then these character interactions with these characters that you find interesting, that a lot of the other stuff, especially the stuff that's more plot based, kind of drags. And the big problem that I've always had with Sense and Sensibility is centrally that the men that the women are all obsessed with essentially disappear for most of the book, particularly with Eleanor. So if you've seen the movie, I think it's Hugh Grant plays the character that she's interested in. The movie did a little bit more to establish why Eleanor is in love with him in the first place. But beyond that, you're kind of left with this weird sense of, she met this guy for like a week or two. He disappears for most of the rest of the book. And then at the end, no spoilers, but things work out. And it's not very compelling as a piece of narrative fiction. I did appreciate the way that the audiobook brought it to life. I'm also not saying Jane Austen is bad, but as much as the audiobook could do to bring it to life, and I was interested because I did have a heavy prejudice against audiobooks for the longest time, but you can see how if it's read by a really competent actress, it makes a lot of sense. And she is really, really good in terms of how she reads it. But even with that, I mean, there's a little bit too much, I guess. I mean, at the heart of it, Sense and Sensibility is really about class. And that's why the focus on the love interests becomes kind of silly, because ultimately it's not really about Eleanor and Edward or Marianne and Colonel Brandon or whomever else. I mean, centrally it's about these girls who were rich and are now poor and are having to both pursue love, but also pursue something that's not going to leave them continuously poor, and that constant navigation. So it's interesting in that way, but unfortunately, because you still have these central romances, the fact that they are so underdeveloped and that they feel kind of haphazard by the end, or you can't really figure out why she's in love with that person or whomever else, that part always kind of makes it a little bit of a miss for me. But if you have had a hard time getting through Jane Austen's other stuff, Juliet Stevenson, I think, reads a couple more of the books. And I really, really do recommend that audiobook if you've had a hard time getting through it. As a book on its own, I mean, I think I would still rather watch the movie than read the book again. And every time I did try going back to the book itself in between listening to the audiobook, I did find I was getting less out of it than I was when I was having somebody who clearly understood the material much better read it to me. So I thought it was an interesting experience. I've definitely changed my mind on audiobooks quite a bit because of that experience. But Sense and Sensibility as on its own, unfortunately, wasn't as compelling as I would hope it would be. So the third one is the first book of short stories that I've read by Ali Smith, and that was The First Person and Other Stories. Jen Campbell did recommend this specific book. I didn't realize until I picked it up that this was the one that Jen Campbell had recommended, and it was that one about the little boy in the shopping trolley who just sort of appears there. And then the woman feels like she's tasked with taking care of him, and then the child starts saying racist things. I think it's meant to be about this exploration of motherhood where it feels like something that's being foisted upon her, and then her big worry that she's creating the next generation. I can't say that I really recommend it. I do prefer Ali Smith's novels to the short story series that I've read so far. I'm going to try a couple other short stories from her, but we'll see. I do wish so far that this list had been better and that I had enjoyed more things, but there was just something about the short stories that they did feel a little bit too bare to me. A lot of them are just portrayed as dialogues between her and her current partner, whomever that might be. But I mean, a couple of them were interesting. The shopping trolley one was interesting, that Jen Campbell has mentioned in the past. But beyond that, it didn't really grip me the way something like How to Be Both or Girl Meets Boy did. And then also, I've never been a huge fan of short stories in general, so that doesn't help either. And number 4 is one that I'm really, really happy I can say that I loved. And that was When We Were Alive by C.J. Fisher. Obviously, C.J. Fisher is another YouTuber. She, I think, has had like 1 million handles by now. There's Old Hot Radio, and there is... I'm totally blanking on her current channel name, but I'm going to link it down below either way. So it was really good. It reminded me a lot of Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, partly because it's told across several timelines, and partly because it's set during World War II. It is her first novel. So, with that in mind, it has a little bit of the shakiness that a first novel sometimes does have. But the core of it and the understanding of character and the things that the characters go through and the storytelling in general, I did think was really sharp and really evocative. And so, what you have and what you should want to have in a first novel is something that feels really promising for the future, but also on its own was just a compelling read. So I'm really happy to say I did love it. If you've been thinking of checking it out, I would definitely recommend it. I think it was only like $5 when I got it off Kindle. Um, and that's pretty much it. I'm having a little bit of trouble describing the plot. I think if I did have to describe the plot, it's sort of Life After Life is a good callback. Actually, in some ways, A God in Ruins is probably closer because it does center on two or three male characters. It does do the same thing that Kate Atkinson's novels do, where it's sort of following this generational trend of, the next man who's experiencing these points in history or these points in their lives. Um, to say more than that, I think is both to give it away, but also that it does feel much more experiential than it does plot based. But like I said, if you weren't thinking of checking it out, I would really recommend it, and I really enjoyed it. So those are the first four for March. Like I said, I'm hoping I'll have at least another four before the end of the month. But I did want to get this in just to avoid doing another 45-minute video with like 10 books. So if you've read any of these, let me know what you think of them below. If you currently have questions about, let's say, audiobooks or this last one that I read that I really enjoyed and would very much recommend, if you want to yell at me about something, if you want to agree with me about something, feel free to do it in the comments and like and subscribe. Other than that, thank you again for watching, and hopefully I'll be back soon with another video. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.